Provider is a state management package for your application, so you don't have to use set state in your app to update the state for multiple widgets. Okay, so if you go to the user list screen that I created, so normally you would use set state if you want to update the state of your widget. So I have it in the home screen here too, set state, and the user list is a local state here. So for the app here, you can put in a name, Julian, and a city here, Tokyo. And then I can add some more random strings here, add. Then I can go to the list screen, which is the same widget as you see here. List, and then I can delete this and go back. You can see it's gone. I can delete. It's gone here too. Okay, so I'm just using this user list stateless widget. I'm using it in both the user list screen and the home screen. Okay, so this is the home screen. This is the user list screen. And basically I'm just using a form here and I'm calling add user when I press the add button. So that's creating a new user and it's adding it to the local state here with set state. And the delete user function is called when I press the trash can icon here. So I also created a few like customized buttons here. Okay, and for the cheetah input, that's the input for this screen here. You can see the code for that. And this will all be on my GitHub. So this initial code here, you'll find in the GitHub repo. And that will be in the description of the video. Okay, so now let's go to the documentation and you see Provider 5 here. It was just released on March 4th. I'm going to talk about the most used providers, which are the ChangeNotifier provider, stream provider, and the feature provider. So back to the code. The first thing I want to do is I want to create a new ChangeNotifier provider. If you don't know what that is, you can see here. It says it listens to a ChangeNotifier, which is part of the Flutter package, and it is exposed to its descendants, and it rebuilds whenever the ChangeNotifier notify listeners is called. So that's the important part here, is this function here. And you can see here how it's done, but let's go back to the code. And I'm going to create a new file here. I'm going to call it, let's call it controller. I like to use that for the name of my notifier folder. So controller, and then I'm going to add a new file. I'm going to say user notifier .dart. And then I'm going to create a new class. So class user notifier. And then I'm going to say extends change notifier. So extending this class here tells the app that you might have variables here that might change and your app needs to know of those changes. Okay, so in here, I'm going to create a few different variables. I'm going to say list user. So it's going to be a list of different users like here. And for the user class, we have just name, city. Very, very basic. Okay, so I'm going to say underscore user list equals empty list. So the underscore is a private variable. So let's import our user. And then I'm going to say int, let's say age, and I will create another int called, let's call it height. So for now, I want to focus on the user list. Okay, so now I'm going to create a new list. So it's going to be an unmodifiable list view. So this is just a way to wrap your list view so you can't modify it directly. You normally don't want to modify your state directly, especially if it's a list. So I'm going to say of type user and then get user list. And then I will return the unmodifiable list view wrapped around the user list. If you're not sure what this does, you can go into the class here and you can kind of look at the source code. I'm not going to go into that right now, but you can take a look here. So we can save this. So we have our getter for the list. So down here, I want to create a few different functions. So I'm going to say add user. And then we're going to pass in a new user. So user. And then I'm going to add a new user to the list. So I want to say user list dot add, and then I would just add that user to the list. So user. And then to actually notify the app that it has changed, I'm going to say notify listeners. Okay, so this line here is the most important part. So this combined with the change notifier is pretty powerful. And you'll see how that works in a little bit. So down here, I'm gonna create a new function, say delete user. And then I'm gonna pass in the index that I want to delete. So if I want to delete the third user in the list, then I will say 0, 1, 2 and pass in 2 here. Okay, so index. Then I'm going to say underscore user list dot remove where. I'm going to remove the user where the index is equal to the index that I pass in here. So I get the user and then I will say underscore user dot name is equal to user list at that index dot name. Okay. And this should be underscore here. Okay. So it's saying remove where, and then I'm passing in a function that returns the user where the name is equal to the name at that index. So hope that makes sense so far. And then I want to do a notify listeners. Notify listeners. Okay. While we're here, I want to add some functions for the age and height. So I want to increment the age and height, and I will add that functionality later to the UI here. But for now, let's do increment age, and then that's a pretty simple function here. We'll just say age plus plus and notify listeners. Let's copy and paste this, increment height, and do underscore height. Okay, so that's all I'm going to do for the, actually, I need to add the getters for this too. So don't forget that also. You always want to try to add getters for your change notifier variables. So we will do int get age, return underscore age, int get height, underscore height. So now we need to register a change notifier with our app so that it knows that this class is notifying the app of changes. So doing that is actually pretty easy. We can go to our main. So the first thing I want to do here in our main is I want to register our change notifier provider with the app. So to do that is actually pretty easy. Instead of having my app here, instead of run app directly, we can wrap that in a multi-provider. A multi-provider is a way for you to register multiple providers with your application. So I would say multi-provider, and you can pass in your provider array here. So down here, I can say change notifier provider. So if you want to register a change notifier like we did here, then we need to actually use a change notifier provider. And normally you would pass in like a context here, but we could just put underscore for now because we don't really need to use it. So then we're going to return a user notifier. So this expects a type of change notifier. That's our first provider being registered in the app. So now let's actually replace our set state in our home screen with the change notifier methods. Okay, so we want to add a user and delete a user. So let's go back to our home screen. So here in our home screen, let's see, down here in our add user, we're calling the add user here locally, and then the add user is calling user list.add. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get rid of this user list because we already have our user list defined in our change notifier. So let's get rid of this. So let's get rid of this, and also let's get rid of our delete user too, because this is the same logic that we have in our change notifier. So let's get rid of this. And now to actually create a provider or a user notifier, we need to create a new instance of it. So let's go down here and we'll create a new user notifier here. And let's call it user notifier. And then to actually create it, you say provider dot of. So at this point, you could pass in the type of change notifier. So you could say user notifier. So this creates a new instance of user notifier. So we can just put that here, and we need to pass in our context because it expects a context too. So context. And I just realized that I put this in the wrong spot. So we need a build context for this, right? So this should not be up here in our state directly. It should be inside of the build method. So that's something to keep in mind. Whenever we use something from this provider here, it will rebuild this entire widget, which might not be what you want. But for now, let's use this. So let's go down here. So user notifier. And instead of add user, let's comment this out. We will say change or user notifier dot add user, and then pass in the same user here. Okay, so we're doing the exact same thing, but instead of using local state, we're using our change notifier via our change notifier provider. Okay, so here, before we were passing the user list to the user list screen and the delete user method too. So we're passing it to the user list screen and passing it to the user list widget to show here. So now we can get rid of these two. Okay, so no more passing around these variables and functions. So save. Oops, save. Let's go to our user list screen first. And we can get rid of these two. Get rid of these. And now since we can delete the user directly with the trash can icon, we can get rid of this set state function too in this entire function. So let's get rid of this. And then let's go to our user list down here. And we no longer pass these in. So let's get rid of these. This too. Okay, and you can kind of already see that we are simplifying the code a lot more by not passing around all these different objects. Okay, so we can get rid of that. So first, let's work on the user list screen. So let's get rid of that. And now this screen is okay because this only represents the entire screen, not the actual list itself. So back to the user list. Now we need to actually show the user list items here. So for the text, there's a couple of different options. So in provider 3, I showed you how to use the consumer widget. So the consumer lets you listen for a change on a specific change notifier, and it'll only update that widget that it surrounds. So we can surround the text widget here with the consumer. So consumer, and then you tell it the type of notifier. So it's a user notifier. And then you pass in the widget that you want to build here. So let's cut this out. And for the builder, it takes in the context, the actual notifier itself. So we could say notifier. Then it takes a child. So we're only going to use the actual notifier. So if you don't want to use these other two objects here, then you can actually just put like an underscore here, or not like that, but here, and then you could put 2 here. So if you had a third one here, it would be 3. But for now, we have 1 and 2. Okay, and now we can return the widget that we want to create, which is the text widget. Okay, comma, and let's see, no comment here. We don't need to do this anymore. We can say notifier dot user list, and then pass in the index dot name. And then we can do the same thing here. Use the dot city here. So I kind of hope that you can see what we're doing so far. I should have done this before, but if you want to see how this rebuilds, you can do a print statement. So you can say print user list rebuilding, or just building. Okay. Now we need to account for the delete method here. So we have our consumer here, right? And we're not using a provider like we did before on the home screen. So we can either do this or we can use consumers. But we've already started using the consumer here. So let's continue with that. So I want to wrap the icon button in the consumer now. So consumer of type user notifier, and then builder, we'll do the same thing here, underscore notifier double underscore. And then we'll return the icon button, parentheses. And now we want to use our delete function. So we can say notifier dot delete. We pass in the index. So we can just have the index and get rid of this part here. Okay. Think we have an extra parentheses. Yeah. Okay. So one more thing, the users.length. So this one is a bit tougher because this is not a widget. So we can't just use a consumer here. So I'm going to go up here and copy the notifier here, add that to the build. So now we can use this user notifier object down here and say user notifier dot user list dot length. Okay, and I hope you can see that it doesn't really make a lot of sense to use both if you don't need to, but in this case we kind of need to because we're trying to use the value of the user list outside of a widget itself. Okay, so let's run this and see if it still works. So let's do Flutter run. Oops. Let's do Flutter run. And while this is going, I can double check a few things. I can go to our user list here. And we can make this a stateless widget now too. So let's do that just to make things a little bit cleaner. Let's get rid of this. We can say user list screen extends stateless widget. And we have an error here. Oh yeah, let's go back to our main here. I think I missed something. So when I moved this to a multi-provider, I forgot to add the my app backend. So inside of here, we can add the child, and that'll be my app. Okay, let's restart. And let's test. So let's put some random stuff in here, and let's go to our list. That works. Let's try to delete, go back, and everything works the exact same. So I hope you can see the power of this already. So in version 4, they added something called the read and watch functions. So that's an even better way to watch and read different variables in your change notifier. Instead of doing this here, down here, I'm going to use something called watch. So the syntax for this is not too difficult. You just say context. So we have our context from the build context up here. Context dot watch. So I'm saying watch something from the user notifier, and that something will be the user list dot length. So whenever the length changes, this watch will get triggered, which will cause the user list to be rebuilt, and our new user will be added to the list, or we will delete a user from the list. Okay, so let's rebuild or restart. Let's test this again. So let's add user. Okay, that looks good. Add. Now let's try to delete from here. Let's delete. Okay, so let's go up here to our consumer now. And instead of the consumer, I want to watch for the name and the city now. So in order to do that, we can actually remove our consumer like so. So we have our text like before. And instead of this here, we could say context dot watch, and then of type user notifier dot user list, and so on. Okay. And then we could say the same thing down here. And now let's test this. So you can see how using provider, it just cleans things up a lot. So you don't have to pass things around, and you can also listen in for different changes in your provider. So let's restart. And let's add something here. Add, delete, add some more. Let's go to our list. And with the test, delete. Okay, so up here, we can actually delete this now too. Let's go back to our user list screen. That looks good. Back to our home screen. And here we can also use the read and watch for the functions. So before we were just using it for the variables, but now we can say context dot read. So if you want to use a function, don't use watch, use read first, then user notifier, and then dot add user, and so on. So remember, if you want to use a function from the notifier with this syntax here, use context.read, not context.write. Okay, let's save, and let's go back to the user list one more time, and I forgot to do it for the delete here too. So let's actually get rid of this, and we could say context.read user notifier dot delete at index. Okay, and we can do that here too. Oh yeah, so I kept the watch here too, so that's not a good thing. You don't need to use both. So let's get rid of the consumer here. I really like that they created these new ways to read and watch the variables. Watch and read just makes things so much easier to like look at and process, you know? I think that's all I wanted to do for the user list and the home screen. That covers reading, writing, consumer. Let's reload and test to make sure. Add, delete, add, and delete. Okay, looks good. Let's go back. So I only talked about the change notifier provider so far, but let's go look at the API file that I created here too. So I created get profile username, get current time, get session time. So I wanted to create two futures with some delay to kind of mock a actual API response and a get session time stream. So this stream will increment this value every second. So every second it'll go from 0, 1, 2, 3. And I want to show these values in our toolbar here, like the app bar up here. And I want to create providers to actually monitor that data. So let's go to our main. So that's the reason why I created a multi-provider here, is because I'm going to be adding more providers to this. So down here, I'm going to add something called a feature provider. And the feature provider is created the same way as a change notifier provider, but you also have the initial data field here. So up here, we're going to say underscore. First, let's do this. And then I'm going to pass in, or then I'm going to return a feature here. So when you create a feature provider, the create here expects to return a feature. So I'm going to return the get profile. I think that's what I called it. Let's just copy and paste it here. And then we can, and then for the initial data, it's just going to be 0. Okay. And let's just go up here and import that. API and Cheetah API. Okay. Okay, next I'm going to create a provider for our stream. So up here, I want to say stream provider. So initial data is going to be 0. Okay, so I made a mistake. So I meant to put 0 for the stream provider, not the feature provider. So that's something good to know. So since this returns a feature string, the initial data should be a string too. So up here, I'm going to say loading name. So this is what you'll see when the app first loads. And then after the feature completes, the string from this feature will be put into whatever text that you want it to be put into. Okay, so for the stream provider, this will be 0. So we'll say get session time. And that should be underscore. Okay, So now let's use both of these and see how they work. So first I'll go to the home screen, and in the app bar, in the title, first let's wrap the text in a consumer just to see how this looks of type string. Okay. This takes in the builder. So this would be the builder underscore. Actually, this won't be the notifier. This will be the string because the consumer is of type string. So this would be title, let's call it, and child. Or let's just do 2 underscores. Return the text. And this should be this. Okay. So now we could pass in the text here, the title. Okay, so this consumer is of type string. So back in the main here, we have one feature provider that returns of type string. If we had 2 feature providers of type string, then like say we had this and we had some other thing here, some other function here. If you had 2 different string features here and you use this syntax, then whenever you received a string from a feature, that value would get put into this object here. So this would get triggered twice. And depending on the actual the timing of it, you'll either see the first one and then the second one, or you will only see the second one. So because we only have one string feature, this would work as you would expect it to work. Okay, so this title here would be the get profile username. Okay, so we'll put that title into here and let's reload. And I missed something. Let's go look at the error. Consumer. Let's go back to the main. Oh, I deleted the feature. Okay. So let's delete this one and let's reload. Okay, see loading name. After 5 seconds, you'll see Julian Curry. Okay, so you can kind of see how you would want to use this if you want to call some API before your app first loads or at the beginning of your app launch, for example. That's very handy. So you might be thinking that we can use the watch here with the string value. Let's try it out to be sure. So let's get rid of this and let's do context dot watch of type string and see if this works. So because you can't do any method calls or actual like variables, you can just do this and see if this works. So let's reload. You see loading name and Julian Curry. So now I will show you how to use the second one here without the multi-provider. So let's go to the home screen and down to our single child scroll view. Let's see. Let's put it above our cheetah inputs. So up here, first let's do a size box, I think. Height, let's do the same, 16. And up here, I'm going to create my feature provider inside of this home widget. So let's do feature provider, initial data. We will do loading time. So it kind of works the same way as we did defining it in the multi-provider, but this localizes the feature provider to a single class here, to a single widget, which is our home widget. So now in our create, I want to call the other API method. So let's do get current time. Okay, and I am missing the input here. So it should be an arrow function. So like this. Okay. So that's it for the feature provider. But this by itself doesn't really do much because we're not actually showing any UI. So when this completes, we need to say what happens after that. So after it completes, we could show a child widget. So for this, we could say text time complete. Save, reload. Okay, so you can see that the actual feature didn't really complete. So what we can do with this is we can create a consumer around this. So this will consume that time when it completes. So we can say consumer string, and then we have our builder. You know the drill. So underscore, let's say time string underscore underscore. Okay. Now we'll pass in the time string here. So let's see if this works. So let's reload. You can see loading time here. After 5 seconds, you should see the time. So 2 a.m. here. Yep, I'm working pretty late, but it's okay. Okay, and let's make the text a bit bigger. Let's do a style, text style. Let's do font size, something like 18. Okay. So that's two different ways to actually build a feature provider. You can do it in the main, like so, and just consume it wherever you want to in the app, or you can do it locally, as we did in the home screen, and you can consume it directly in the home screen itself. So let's go back to the main, and I already have my stream provider here, right? So let's figure out how to consume that. Let's go back to the home screen, and up in the app bar, I want to create a leading widget. So leading means that it'll be before the text up here. So leading, and let's make it a consumer. So I'm going to consume the actual stream. So let's do consume consumer int. It's of type int, and we will do the builder underscore. It's not time. Let's do value, I guess. Underscore underscore, and we will return a text that is time dot toString because it's an int or value. It's not time. It's a value dot toString. Okay. And the consumer, so we have our build here. Let's just see how this looks. So let's restart. So up here you can see 1, 2, 3, 4. So every second we just increment that. So that's one way to consume the string or the stream. Let's make this look a little bit better too. So let's do a centered text. So let's do center, child, style, text style, and we're going to add some size to that. So font size, and we'll do 18. Okay, that looks better. And as you might expect, you can use the watch if you want to. So let's go delete this, and let's do context dot watch int dot toString. Let's reload, and you can see the same behavior here. And I got rid of our center here for some reason. So let's do center. Okay, so the same behavior with watch. So I hope you can see here, this is very interesting. So you can see our user list building every time that increments. So that's actually not what you want. So let's go back to our consumer real quick. And let's reload. And now, as you can see, we don't get that same log here. So that's something that you should be very, very aware of. When you're using watch in your widget, that is actually rebuilding the entire widget tree or the widget itself, the entire stateless widget or the entire stateful widget. So like we can do a print here too. So we can say print home rebuilding. And then let's reload. So you can see here, that's not being called every time this increments. So this is what you would want in your app. If something is changing in your app, you only want that one widget to be rebuilt. I did mention this before too. Like consumer is what I usually prefer over the watch. Let's change that back to watch just to make sure that what I just said is true. So let's get rid of this again, and we'll do context.watch int .toString. Let's restart. And yeah, you can see here, every single time this increments, home is rebuilding, user list is rebuilding. That is not good. So that's not what you want. So that's the normal behavior that you would see with like set state too. You would see the user list being rebuilt and the home being rebuilt every time you press or every time you invoke a set state. So that is something to keep in mind. This syntax looks a lot better. It's very concise, very short, but it's not very efficient compared to using a consumer. Yeah, don't forget that. That's very important. So, um, okay, so let's change it back one more time. Okay, so there's one last thing that I want to talk about. So I created these two functions in the controller here. So the increment age and increment height. So I want to talk about using the selector widget. So the selector is even more efficient than the consumer widget. Let's go back to the home screen, and I want to create two more buttons here. I want to create, let's say, I think down here, yeah. So cheetah button. Uh, let's just copy and paste these. So 1 and 2. So this one will be age, and this one will be height. I will use the functions that are in the change notifier. So I will say context.read, and then I will say user notifier dot increment age. Okay. So this, and then I'm going to copy this here. Okay, and then increment height. Okay, so let's reload. That does not look good, so let's add some sized box in here. Okay, so now when I press these, those values will get incremented. We have some errors here. Okay. Two of these here. There we go. Okay, so now I want to create selectors. So I want to select on the age in the app bar here. So let's go up to the app bar, and let's see, below the title, let's put it under here. I want to add some actions. So actions are widgets that will show on the right side of your title up here. So leading is the left side, actions are the right side. And you can put like multiple widgets here too. So let's do actions. And then for the actions, I'm going to create a centered, and we'll do child. And for the child, I'm going to have a selector. So selectors are very powerful. Selectors are equivalent to the context.watch, but like I said before, the watch is not very efficient because it rebuilds the entire widget, while selector does not do that. Okay, so let's do selector, and then you pass in first the type of user notifier and then the type that you expect to select on. So we will select on the age, which is a int. So we'll say int here. And then we have a builder. So the builder will be the actual thing that you want to see, the widget. So like before, because you do underscore, and then for this, we'll say age, and let's just do underscore twice. And we return the text, and we can pass in the age. age.toString actually. So put some commas in here. And now we need to select on that too. So let's add our selector. So the selector tells it what to select on because it doesn't know what this should be by default. It knows that it's an int, but it doesn't know which int inside of your user notifier. This takes in the type of context. So context or just underscore, and then the actual notifier object. So let's call it notifier. Notifier. And then we return the actual value that we want to select on. So I want to say notifier.age. Okay. So if I did notifier.height, then this value here would be the actual height, not the age. But I want to say .age. Okay, so this is saying when the age changes, then set it to this text here. If this was height, then this will say when the height changes, set the height to this. And it only changes this text value. It only rebuilds the text value if that particular value changes. So .age here again. Okay, I think that's all we want to do for this one. Okay, so let's restart. And now when I press the height button, let's see what happens. Nothing. When I press the age button, let's see. And you can see that we increment it by 1 every time. Let's go back and let's change this to height just to see if it works the same way. Now let's change the age first. Nothing in height. So you can see that this selector is very powerful because it only listens for a particular field within your notifier. Okay. So yeah, I covered a lot of things. I covered the change notifier provider. I covered the future provider. I covered the stream provider. I covered reading and watching values using just the context. I hope it kind of helps you get a firm understanding of the library. I use it a lot in my apps. So yeah, stay tuned for the next video and happy coding. Bye.